How do you build trust today? Welcome to Tea at Taxevity, where you get insights from insiders who make life better, our many clients and friends. I'm Pramod Sharma, the actuary at the Taxevity Insurance Advisory, and when I'm not doing interviews, I'm helping people tame the financial risks they can transfer with insurance. Our guest today is Dr. Deborah Nixon. Welcome, Deborah.
Good to meet you, Pramod.
Now, Deborah, when you're not being interviewed, what do you do?
I really help people learn how to build high trust relationships, how to deal with relationships when trust has been broken. So I work with organizations, individuals, teams.
Okay, and we'll be talking about trust, which
Right.
makes you an ideal guest for our topic.
Good.
So first of all, what is the state of trust these days?
So trust has been declining since the 60s. So you'd look at politically, institutionally, trust in authorities. It's all been going down. There are a bunch of reasons why that might be. It's generational. The big shift that we saw societally in the 60s. But we can see it, and everybody can experience it on a personal level that we question everything. We question the police, we question the church, we question our institutions, we question corporations.
Because I remember as a kid that you'd trust what your teacher said, and if a policeman said something, you'd trust that. Basically, you could trust adults. Like even as a kid, I knew you couldn't trust politicians. But it just seems that everything has declined, and now it's really hard to know who you can look at and say that they're trustworthy.
Yeah, it's really tough, and I think part of it, of course, is our access to information. So we're now able to really check what people tell us, the impact of the media. We're able to look at an issue or look at a comment from so many different perspectives that I think that we're, moving forward much more cautiously than we might have in the past.
Mm-hmm. Now, what sort of things break trust?
People sometimes think it's a really big thing that'll break trust. And what really breaks trust is really a series of small things. It's like when you chip away at a relationship or you chip away at an interaction. So that finally, it's kind of like water dripping until it finally, it bursts open. And that's what happens with trust. So you start out in a good relationship and then you have, somebody didn't come through with something. They didn't do what they say we're going to do. Okay, you let that one go. And then it happens again and you let it go. And then something else happens in the relationship. And these little things keep on piling up. And what we normally do is we explain it away. Because, we don't want to make a big fuss. We don't want to make a big thing of it. And so what happens is over time, these things start layering on top of each other. And then something significant to us happens that the person does or doesn't do. And that's your breaking point. And so it's often where people will say, gee, why did that relationship break apart? It was like such a small item. It was such a small issue. But in the mind of that person, it wasn't just a single issue. It was that final issue built upon a whole series of other events.
Okay, so it is not just one particular thing that causes this to happen. It's interesting that you say that because that does make a lot of sense. That you think you can trust someone and then a little happens, and then all of a sudden the gray has turned to black and they're just not people you can trust anymore.
Yeah, and I always tell people, building trust happens in the daily, minute series of events of our everyday lives. So you build trust with somebody not through big gestures. That's not really how you build trust. It's through the things that we often don't think about or the things we dismiss. It comes in things like somebody tells you that they're going to be somewhere at 1 o'clock and they show up at 1:15 and they do that a few times. So it's not a big deal. You think, oh, what's the big deal? But what the big deal is one of the key components of trust is your consistency. Are you reliable? Are you going to do what you say you're going to do? Might seem like a little matter to you, but to that other person, it's a test. It's a measure of, are you going to follow through with your commitment? So you do a few of those things, you do something else, you forget to pick something else up, you forget to perform a task, you let a coworker down. All of that stuff then begins to pile on, and we've got long memories.
Okay.
And so we think about this stuff. Sometimes it could be a really big thing, but if you deconstruct a really big event, even big events don't tend to happen in isolation. There's usually
Okay.
context built around that big event that seems to break things.
Okay, and you talk about trust having 5 elements, the 5 C's, I think you call
Yes.
them. Let's start with those elements. What's the first one?
So the first one is we talked about is consistency. And when
Okay.
I talk about consistency, has a couple of aspects to me. Consistency is do what you say you're going to do. But the other part of consistency is in behavior. And this is really important in the workplace. It's important at home too. It's very hard for you to trust somebody if you're not sure who's walking through the door in the morning or at the end of the day. So people who are really emotional or whose emotions really swing a lot, it's really hard to build trust when you're dealing with somebody like that because you're always on edge. So I tell people, not only should you be consistent in terms of follow through, but you have to be consistent in behavior and in decision making so that I know what to expect from you, that when I ask you a question, not that I should second guess you, but I can anticipate the range of where I think you'll go with the question so that I'm comfortable when I'm coming to you. If when I go into your office, if you're my manager, and I'm not sure if that same question is going to get an explosion or cooperation, I'll do one of two things. I'll approach you really hesitantly, and maybe I won't give you the full picture, or maybe even worse, I'll avoid you altogether. And that's sometimes where you get these yes management systems where a CEO or a very senior executive will say, gee, it's really hard for me to understand what's going on in my own organization because nobody will tell me the truth, especially the negative truth.
Okay.
Some of that's because the people, maybe you're sending something out that says, I'm not sure I want to hear it. So those people essentially don't trust in your own behavior, that they can trust your reaction.
Consistency seems like a boring element, though.
Right. And it does seem boring. And what we're talking about is not being the same all the time, doing the same things day in, day out. But what we're saying is you need to have a certain level of predictability. So we all want control in our lives. That's the one thing all of us search for, is we try to control the aspects of our lives where we can. We can't control other people, for sure, and we know that. But what we want in the people who are around us is an ability to know we can count on them, not only to do what they're going to say they're going to do, but also that we can count on their behavior. I don't want to be, I don't want you coming from left field. I don't want you blindsiding me. I want to know that the reception I'm going to get from you when I approach you is going to be one that I can anticipate. And I tell people consistency sometimes can be consistently bad too.
Oh.
Right? If
and
you
that
yell
would be
all
okay?
the time, at least I'm braced and I know. What I think people have a hard time with is the up and down. People don't like uncertainty. It's really hard for us to plan. And so what happens is when you have uncertainty, Veru and I are going to have a conversation and you're volatile, I'm not going to really be listening very well to you because all the time I'm going to have another conversation going on in my head in terms of my defense. So what should I say next? Okay, he's talking now. Okay, I wonder where he's going with that. What does he mean by that? Do you think he'll yell, should I say this or should I say that? Like, what a waste of time. So because you're not consistent, I've got to do all this extra psychological work.
Right, and I can think of people, as you're speaking, I can think of people who I realize have not been consistent, and as a result, I just haven't felt that I could trust them.
Right, and so it's hard for you if you're a manager or you're my partner to get a real authentic conversation with me because you're always going to wonder, are you holding back? Or and because I don't trust you as a volatile person, I'm really going to wonder what you're really thinking. And so what happens is we always just miss each other. And that leads to a series of other problems. So consistency is really important in building trust.
Okay, and what's another element?
Another one is candour. So candour is speaking the truth. And there's a difference between candour and brutal honesty. So, you hear people always say, well, I'm really proud of the fact that I tell it like it is. So what I always say about candour is if somebody asks you your opinion of something, you're obligated as an honest person to tell them the truth. But we don't look at candour without looking at empathy. So that you have to tell somebody the truth with sensitivity.
Okay.
So candour means that if I ask you a question, I expect you to give me the full answer and to tell me the truth. So if we're in a work situation, there's rumors of downsizing, there's rumors of layoffs, and I'm coming to you as my boss, maybe part of that's confidential and you can't tell me. What you would tell me in candor is, look, you're right, there is potentially going to be something happening, but because of the confidentiality of this, we're just not at the point where I can share it with you. I will always tell you what I know, and I will always share with you the extent that I can tell you, but recognize that there are parts that I can't. And that's more honest than just kind of avoiding it or saying, don't worry about it, or I don't know anything. Because if a senior manager says I don't know anything, nobody believes it anyway.
Right, that's a good point.
Yeah, so better to say, here's what I do know. So candor is really important in building trust so that I don't have to go away second guessing what I've heard from you.
Okay, and what's another element?
Another element is commitment. So are you committed to me, to the relationship, to our project, to whatever it is we're endeavoring to do together? It then, all comes together again with the consistency and the candor. So are you committed to be here for the long haul? Are you committed to this relationship? Are you committed to do what you need to do to get what it is we agreed to do done?
But if I've got a job and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, then how does it matter if I'm committed? I'm doing it anyway.
Well, I think with commitment, consistency and the other pieces come into place. So I can work with somebody who's just basically doing the job. But let's say the job requires some extra time.
Okay.
We're committed to working on it. So are you committed to me as your workmate, and it's 5:00 and you're running out the door and you say, too bad. So as your workmate, can I really trust that at the end of the day you'll do what it takes to deliver, not just to the organization and not just to our project, but to me, because we're in this together.
Right.
So I think commitment, goes beyond just like you were hired to do this, so just don't do anything more. Commitment comes from a deeper place. It comes from a place of saying, I've got your back.
Okay, yes, that makes a lot of sense.
As opposed to, okay, I collect a paycheck, I'm doing this job, and I'm only going to do as much as I absolutely have to. I'm not going to do anything else. See, somebody who works like that, I don't think I could trust them if I'm in a bind and I'm in a pinch. Can I call on you, and can I believe that you'll actually try to help me?
Right, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think that might be the difference.
Okay, and the next element?
It is caring. So it works again with the commitment and do you have your back. So I'm not going to trust you if I don't think you care about me.
Okay, so if I'm just saying, hey, I'm here from 9 to 5, then that means I don't really care.
Well, what is going to happen between 9 and 5? So we have a couple of scenarios. You can say to me, I'm only here between 9 and 5 because, and give me a reason. I've got kids to pick up or I've got some other commitment.
Okay.
However, I feel your pain. I know what you have to go through. Would it be helpful if I came in early, or I did something from home, or I took something else off your desk tomorrow so that you can come and you can finish this? That again says, I care about you, I care about the situation, I'm going to have your back, I'm going to look out for you, and that I have your best interests at heart. So often what happens is that we kind of surround ourselves with this whole aura of being trustworthy or caring, and yet when we're put to the test, some of us fail. And part of it is because we're not really looking deep down inside about where is this building of trust coming from. Is it opportunistic? In other words, it's good business to build trust, or that at the end of the day, you're putting my interests before your own. So when somebody helps somebody, do you get pleasure out of helping that person? Does it make you feel good as a person to be able to reach out and help another person, even if there's nothing in it for you?
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the final element.
Credibility.
Okay.
So credibility is all about, are you believable? And so some people think credibility has to do with showing your degrees, your certificates, your accomplishments. Credibility isn't about that. Credibility is about your constancy. And it's about somebody...
Constancy? Is that like consistency?
Kind of. So
Okay.
It's like, are you believable? When you tell me something, do I believe what you're telling me? And do you have what it takes to back up what you're saying? So beyond just like... you're trained, you're experienced, you've done all the right courses to deliver this. But are you believable? And to be believable means that you have to have, again, my best interests at heart to be believable.
Mm-hmm.
So you're credible to me if you tell me something and I know it's in my best interests. So are you working from integrity? And I always say that integrity and credibility go together. And integrity is all about what you do when nobody knows you're doing it.
Right.
Right? So what do you do for me and on my behalf when I'm not around? And what do you do in your overall life? Do you have credibility in your overall life?
Mm-hmm. Those are excellent elements, and each of them seems simple, but at the same time, each is important. And when you combine them all, they're very powerful.
Yeah, I think they're really powerful. And you said an interesting point that they're really simple. I think when you talk about trust, everybody has a conception in their mind. Oh, I know what trust is. Oh, I'm trustworthy, or I trust him, I trust her. And yet for something that's so simple, it's such a big challenge, and we have a pretty untrusting society. So, we always have to ask ourselves, if it's so simple and it's so obvious, why is it so hard to achieve? Why is it so difficult? These 5 elements that I've listed to you, I mean, if you think about it on a day-to-day basis, it's a pretty tough test.
Yes, that's true too.
It's a pretty tough test, and it's a pretty high standard. And so we all have to check ourselves every single day as to whether, in fact, we're meeting these 5 C's or not. And a lot of us, most of us, will fall short at some point in time. What matters is, what do we do about it when we do fall short?
Okay, and so say we do fall short in an area, then what should we do?
Right. So, it's like if somebody has breached your trust, what should you do? I mean, the number one thing to do is, the very first thing you have to do is acknowledge it. And the hardest person to acknowledge it to is yourself.
Right.
So it really requires you to be really open and really willing to look at yourself quite critically, and to get away from the blaming and the excusing, which is an instinctive thing. I mean, as kids, we, learn that right away, right? Oh, I didn't do it, he did it. And it all depends on what our parents have said to us at that time. That kind of sets us on our course about how good we are at taking ownership and accountability for our behavior.
Okay.
So, first you have to acknowledge to yourself that maybe you fell short, or maybe you breached your trust. And the second thing you have to do is you have to immediately reach out to that other person. Because when you've breached trust, or when you've fallen short on these 5 C's, it's your obligation to bridge that gap. It's your obligation to reach out to that person who feels that their trust was breached. It's really not up to them to come to you. It's up to you to kind of go to them, talk to them about the situation, and then make amends of whatever needs to be needing amending.
Okay, are there cultural differences when it comes to trusting?
I think that there are cultural differences, and a lot of them are around behaviors. So, to me, there are 2 parts of trusting. There's the attitude, and then there's the behavior. So attitude is everything internal. So, the idea of being empathetic, of being sensitive, of being consistent. Those are more internal things that we have to work with. Then there are the other pieces, which are our external behaviors. So, for example, you can be a really trustworthy person whose body language sends off the opposite message. So, people have to make sure that within the culture, and that's where we'll talk about it, we're working with, that we do the things that emanate trust from us. So in our culture, it's about, making eye contact, being open, being physically open. In other cultures, it could be quite the opposite. In some cultures, making eye contact is really offensive, and it wouldn't build trust at all. I spent a lot of the winter working up in northern Canada with, up in Nunavat, and part of the work that I did was with the Inuit population. And one of the things I learned there is that when I run a workshop, for example, for a group of employees, as we would here in our Western cultures, we put everybody in a room, we'd ask everybody to express their opinion. Well, in the Inuit culture, that's not something people would do. You wouldn't just say something in a group of people, especially to somebody who was a stranger. And so if you're looking, if we decided to measure trust or how to build trust based on my Western North American measurement, I would look at those types of cultures that are more quiet or that are not as extroverted and say, well, that's a big problem. But what we have to do is we have to adjust ourselves. So in that culture, for example, it takes, you build trust one-on-one, you build it in a much slower, quieter way. There are different things that you would look at in terms of what's important to them. And it takes time. It takes longer in certain cultures to build trust than it might in ours. We're a more extroverted kind of culture. So I think what people have to look at when they're building trust is they have to be really sensitive to their context.
Okay.
So their cultural context, their work context, their personal context, about the person who you're opposite, who you're trying to build trust with.
Okay, since it's easy to harm trust, if trust has been lost, can it be rebuilt?
Sometimes. It often can, and sometimes it can't. So some of it has to do with the history between the people. So, we used the early example of breaches that went on over time. Depending on that relationship, breaches that have gone on over time with quite a slow simmer that comes to a boil, sometimes those relationships are just broken and can't be repaired. Some of it also has to do with the perspective of the people coming in. So we talk about what is your trust worldview. That's something that I talk about. So, there are two ends of the spectrum and everybody in between, but basically it's glass half full, glass half empty. I trust, I don't trust. So from our childhood and what we've learned as kids and what we've had reinforced as adults, we'll come into a new relationship or a new situation. We'll say, okay, I'm going to trust this person or this situation until somebody gives me a reason not to.
Yeah, that's basically the approach I take.
And that's your approach. So probably if I was late 3, 4, 5 times, you might be annoyed, but it may not be the type of thing for you to lose trust in. But let's say I came into a relationship or into a situation where I thought, everybody's out to get me. And I think everybody's got an agenda and I don't trust anybody. And you were late 2 or 3 times. I'd probably go, see, told you. Can't even rely on him to be there on time.
Okay.
So, it may take less, for example, to breach the trust. You may do less to me to breach the trust than I would have to do to you. How to rebuild trust in those situations very much depends on whether we're prone to trust or not. If I'm prone to not trust people, it'll be really hard to rebuild trust with me.
Okay.
Especially if you've breached it. It's probably easier with you because you're more expansive and more open in terms of trust. The other thing about whether you can rebuild is this piece around making amends. You're never going to rebuild trust if you don't undo what it is you did. Part of the problem that happens is people get into these huge debates about whether the trust was broken or not.
Okay.
So I'll say, I don't trust you anymore. And you'll say, well, that's ridiculous. Why wouldn't you trust me? What I did wasn't such a big thing.
Okay.
Doesn't matter what you think. Because it's my trust that was broken. And now your job, if you want to keep the relationship with me, is to come over to my side, understand the world from my perspective, and rebuild according to my measurement, not according to your measurement. If you're willing to do that, then maybe the trust can be rebuilt. If you're not willing to do that, then probably it won't be, because I'll never trust you again until you undo what it is I think you did. That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, what's a key message that you would like our viewers to leave with?
A really key message is, I think, around the notion of authenticity and listening. So authentic listening is something, we hear all about deep listening skills, and anybody in the business community knows that we've all had a million courses in listening skills, in how to build our body language, in how to gain relationship and empathy. Things like, if you're in a customer service situation, repeat back to the customer and confirm what they've said to you so that they know you're really listening. And I always say, well, are you really listening, or are you really skilled at telling me what I just said? Because as you're repeating it back, you can still be having another script in your head. So I like to talk about authentic listening, which is, are you listening with not just your head, but are you listening with your heart, and are you listening from that caring place, which is, I really want to listen to what this person has to say, because first of all, I really want to get to know them. I really sincerely want to help them. And I want to be able to show that person that they're an interesting person to me and that their concerns are my concerns. And so I think understanding how you listen and how you can build that authenticity and empathy is a really, really important thing if people want to build trust.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense also. You've given us a lot of valuable advice today, and thank you very much for that. What's the best way for people to reach you?
So they can reach me. I have a website, Trust Learning Solutions. So www.trustlearningsolutions.com, and my contact information is there.
Okay, thanks for dropping by.
Good, thank you.
Thanks for joining us for Tea at Taxevity. The Taxevity Insurance Advisory helps you understand insurance and bridges gaps in your coverage. There's no premium for peace of mind. How healthy is your insurance?